Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Biodiversity Podcast by Teasels. And today I'm joined by Nigel George of Artecology. Hello, Nigel.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Yeah, I'm tip-top. I'm still recovering from what we talked about or what we saw before we pressed record, but that's all going to become clearer, I guess, later on. But so, Nigel, again, a lot of my guests that I have on the podcast, it really interests me, and I've been following your work for 2-3 years now, I guess. So for the people that don't know you, do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Nigel George, and I head up the R&D facility at ARC, Biodiversity and Climate, and the R&D side of things is called Artecology. It's called that because it's sort of, it is what it says on the tin. We are a combination of art and science working together to try and solve some of these big kind of world issues, really, to do with biodiversity loss.
Okay, and so, correct me if I'm wrong, the Artecology, I'm sorry, they're part of the subsidiary of ARC. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like when you say subsidiary.
I know, I hated that word. I'm sorry. Very corporate, didn't it?
Organisation, but I mean, you know, the reality is we're a very small organisation. There's only 5 of us, that work here full time. And we're divided between the various activities that we do, which kind of goes from ecological consultancy to placemaking, master planning, and then on my side, it's eco engineering. The name you give it rather depends on who I'm talking to, and what field they're from. But increasingly, the work that I do on this side in the studio here is being called ecological engineering or eco engineering. But yeah, so I mean, we're a tiny organisation based in the Isle of Wight World Biosphere Reserve, so it's right down on the south coast. Yeah. I think it's fair to say although we are tiny, we are punching well above our weight in terms of what we do, simply because we've been doing it for so long. Artecology was formed about 10 years ago, and with a question about biodiversity loss in a specific place in sea defences, and it's sort of grown from there.
And what is your history? Because you haven't always done this, have you? Correct me if
No, I've got it's a convoluted tale, really, too long to, sort of go into. But I did work in zoology, but not as a qualified zoologist. The reality is I'm not qualified to do any of the things I do, but it doesn't seem to matter much anymore,
No.
And then I in the sort of the turn of the century, I started an arts collective, which grew, and we worked a lot on community projects and in education and all kinds of stuff. We worked for a then government flagship organisation called Creative Partnerships, which was a fantastic time. Sort of kind of well-funded projects for us to go into schools, working with staff and children of all ages on outdoor grounds projects. And it kind of changed our practice completely as a group of sort of working artists and creative practitioners, and really, I suppose, in a way, was the precursor to Artecology in many ways, because we work with so many different organisations. Some of those organisations, like ARC, we became attached to essentially, and then in 2013. Artecology was born with this question about biodiversity loss on sea defences, or as a result of sea defences, and Artecology was born.
So up to now, sort of my focus is all about sort of terrestrial biodiversity loss. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not acutely aware of this sort of biodiversity loss in aquatic environments. Can you just fill in the dots for me then? So what
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem of biodiversity loss, of course, is everywhere. It's not, it's from marine to to the intertidal, and then up into the terrestrial zones. I suppose we started in the intertidal zone simply because Ian Boyd, my fellow director at ARC, and then sort of friend and colleague, came into the studio one day and just sort of said, I've been thinking about this thing, Nigel, that as we see sea level rise and we start to lose this intertidal, horizontal intertidal plane, which of course, we get twice a day, and that habitat is rich habitat, depending on what kind of substrate is there, rocky shore or mud or whatever it is. It's incredibly rich habitat. And as we see sea level rising over years, we're going to see that closing against more and more hard sea defences, until eventually it's just going to be going up and down the sea walls. And Ian said, I wonder if it's possible to create some kind of habitat on the sea walls that would allow that intertidal, rocky shore intertidal, to migrate to a vertical plane. And he said that to me as I'd worked a lot in cementitious materials over the years, particularly when I was sort of back in the zoological days, and I could immediately see what the solution to that was. It was a sculpture, essentially. I could see a sculptural idea that could support rock pool life. And so literally I went away and I just made this little model out of air drying clay. So it basically, it looks a bit like a toadstool or a mushroom, and it's got a basin in the top. And the idea is a kind of stem, a bit like a sink or even a urinal, and it sits on the sea wall like that, and when the tide goes out, water stays in there. Very, very simple principle. And so I sort of, I showed that to Ian and said, what about something like this, on a bigger scale, obviously. And we secured a tiny amount of funding from a great organisation called Artist Project Earth, 8 UK, and a little bit from our local AONB, the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. And we just went ahead and did it. We got permissions to trial some of these things on a seawall here on the island. And that was it. We put these things up, and then, we sort of thought, well, we'll just watch them and see what happens. And it was at that stage Bournemouth University heard about what we were doing, and asked if they could put a PhD student on them, which of course was music to our ears, because it was now Dr. Alice Hall who collected the data and was able to categorically tell us that they work and that they boosted biodiversity on the sea wall, and actually in the first place we installed them outperformed the existing rock pools in the intertidal zone. Wow. In terms of species abundance and biodiversity. So we knew we were onto something,
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, you say music to your ears. So when the PA remind me of her name, the Dr.
Alice Hall.
So so how did she hear about it, and then what?
Well,
how was
the senior lecturer who was her advisor lives on the Isle of Wight, and it's a relatively small place, the Isle of Wight, but it is a small place, and word gets about, Roger just got in contact with us and said, look, this is amazing, because we're looking for things to artificial habitats in the intertidal. There isn't anything really out there, apart from a few things that have been done in Australia at that time. So this is back in 2013, remember? And so that was it. It was just kind of a joining of resources, really. But what that did for us was make us we went through this process with Bournemouth University, and then realised how important that academic connection is. And ever since, we've worked with universities from all over the country. I mean, they come and visit, and we do remote projects with them and all sorts of things. So the academic side is, and not just with the marine and intertidal stuff, but also with the terrestrial work, which is now coming through. You know, it's definitely, the world of eco-engineering has definitely been led by marine and intertidal, but the principles, the thing that we've learned now is that the principles that we use for Artecology, for making things, work just as well in terrestrial settings as well, you know.
So I'm really curious to know how that relationship between yourselves and academia actually works on the ground. Was it a case of, you know, you would do a prototype, you'd put it in place, then they would give feedback, and then you would say, well, if we increase the volume by, you know, if we increase the volume, that would have an effect, or it needs more?
Yeah. I mean, exactly that, Dan, really. I mean, and all sorts of variations around that. So, you know, because we're a small organization, we're very fleet of foot, and we can have an idea in the morning and be doing it in the afternoon, which, you know, often universities and big organizations really struggle to do. And so we've got a habit of just getting on with it, and often, even if we've got no money, we'll do it. You know, part of the way that we work, not part of the way we work, the whole of the way that we work is designed around making these objects in a way that we can do, because we've got the resources already in-house to do it. So we've got no technology at all. We don't use, I mean, I use a bit of CAD for design work, but from a making side, we're literally, you know, these are my 3D printers. And
CAD can get in the way sometimes, can't it? It's good, and
I again, you know, I'm not an expert at it, and I've taught myself to use very simple programs or apps, really, to do certain things, and I probably don't use it in the traditional way. You know, I kind of like, you know, like a true artist, I'd sort of, you know, I can't use it in a back to front way, but it's very useful for that. But generally speaking, it's easier for me to make a three-dimensional prototype. You know, just go to this. I'm on the sort of clean side of the studio at the moment. We've got a messy side over there. I can just go to the bench and start playing around with materials. So when it comes to working with universities, our approach is in all sorts of ways. Initially, it was we made things, shove them out there. You know, they're not just made blindly. Obviously, you know, Ian is an ecologist, so and you know, I'm a crafts person. We've got engineers on the team. You know, we're connected through the Exton George, which was the arts collective. We're connected to all sorts of skilled individuals who, with a very, very cross-discipline approach to, you know, so we've got that in the bag, this very cross-discipline approach to working on things, and it enables us to get quite a long way down the process, if not right to the end, before we have to go somewhere else to, you know. So the only time we would need that really is with academia to come in and do that really sort of hard graft research work. But so what then has happened is universities have then come to us and said, we want to go for funding for an interreg project or something. Would you partner on the project? And we, of course, will say, yes, we will. And then we might work together on a question. And often part of again, I keep saying part of, it's not, it's the whole of the principle of Artecology is about complexity. It's pattern, texture, form. These things are crucial when it comes to the kind of terraforming of life from nothing to something. And that often makes it quite difficult to measure in a scientific way, because this word heterogeneity, patterns that don't really repeat they're handmade. We're not using algorithms. We're just inspired by nature, I suppose. And I mean, I can show you. If I just grab, this is a Sandown model. It's quite heavy. It weighs 13 kilograms. I'll hold it up for as long as I possibly can.
This is your morning workout for this.
Yeah. So this is what we call a Sandown model vertical. They're all named after the first places that they were installed. And you see it's got a stainless steel bracket on the back. It has an armature that goes inside the basin, and then in the basin, in this particular one, it looks like that. And you can see there's lots of what in scientific terms you'd call rugosity, pattern, texture, and form. And these are the sort of precursors to things being able to, very simple life forms to start with, getting in there and making their home, and then that ecological succession takes place and start to develop. So the pattern, the texture and form, this is just bubble wrap printed into, but it works beautifully. But this does make it quite difficult for universities to study, because they want them all exactly the same, so they can have a control, blah blah blah. The problem with that is that we know a plain basin doesn't work as well as a richly textured one. So we have this thing sometimes with academia that we have to sort of, it wouldn't be fair to call it dumbing down, but simplify the designs so that they can look at certain aspects of study. It's still very, very useful, the data that comes back. And meanwhile, we here just keep working with the knowledge that we've got in-house from our own experts, and intuitively, we use a lot of intuition.
But this is a great segue to, you talk about having that complexity in the landscape. And when I got in contact with you, I draw real strong comparisons between your work and the work of John Little.
Yeah, we love John.
He's a good lad, isn't he? But
he's a genius.
Well, but in a way, this is the thing. So the fact that, because something you said earlier, you said I'm not qualified to do anything, and I think that, or to do the stuff that you're doing, and it makes me laugh that I think that and John wasn't a classically trained horticulturalist, whatever that means. But then you're not hamstrung by your conditioning of your education. So you think of it from different points of, from a different point of view, that people may be conditioned to think that wise. But it's interesting that, we do, when you held up that that last item, it was, how much complexity do we get in our landscapes? If you think about how much complexity of habitat is built into retrofitting, new builds. When you lifted that up, I thought of a Swift brick. That's sort of very engineered. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of the Swift brick, but how much complexity do we naturally design into our landscapes, or is it just this standard?
Very little is the answer to that from our experience. We've become obsessed with maintenance, and so now we're kind of branching into the bigger story of artecology, really, which is the state of the state of things, the state of the way that we design our buildings and our towns and our cities. So we call it habitats for humans. We design habitats for humans generally very, very poorly, and it doesn't make people happy. It doesn't make them productive, and it doesn't make them healthy. But we've become, I
think sorry to talk over. I think we've become sort of numb to it. You say like the landscapes and habitats for humans, but we're so used to it. We kind of, I can only talk personally, but you're kind of so used to it. But you think, well, no, this is not a place where I actually want to sit, or I want to go to chill out, or I want to walk through. It's just sort of like, bloody hell, this is pretty. It doesn't even do that.
I totally agree, and that that for us, you know, that's the big job of work, really. And it's why we use artistic principles for Artecology, to try and draw attention to the work that we do. We don't want it to be, you know, you put this thing out there and no one ever sees it or knows that it's there. You know, what we're trying to do is make that we're using the principles of, I suppose, in a way like public art, to draw attention and say that this thing is on the wall here in this town or the city. This planter looks this way. It's heavily designed this way for a reason. It's not an accident. And that way, we can not only give people a sort of meaningful wildlife experience as part of their day, but they can also start to unravel the stories related to these objects that we say, if you do this way. So let's just say you've got a building, and it's made in the normal way. Surfaces are flat and shiny, you know, lots of glass, lots of rain screen. It's fantastically easy to maintain, but it's dull. It's dull in so many ways, and particularly for wildlife. And if it's dull for wildlife, then it's dull for people as well. And so we know that we're not going to turn a building into the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. In fact, we're quite set against that idea. But what we are interested in is having designed in, specially designated objects that are beautifully designed. They make you look, but they have ecological function built in. And if you do these things at critical distances, this is what we're, the kind of latest stuff really that we're working on and have learned in the 10 years or so that we've been working on eco-engineering, is that if you place these objects at critical distances apart, then you get this ecological dialogue really between those objects. So some might have overwintering and hibernation. It's like hibernacular, and it's a street planter, and it also has fruiting plants and pollinating plants in there as well. So you've right there in a single planter, you've created a circular ecological action. And now if you connect that to another scheme that's on the side of a building or whatever it is, or further down the road, you've got another planter that has a slightly different function. You can get things moving around from one place to another.
So connectivity. That's what you're talking about. Yeah,
exactly. And it's and what we've discovered is that you can do this at critical distances, and those critical distances are very, very similar to the critical distances that human beings function on. So, the distance that you can see that a person is, away from you is about, 100 meters or so. As they get to 50 meters, you can see who it is. You might recognize them. Closer still, you can see whether they're happy or they're sad. And, you're preparing yourself for whatever kind of engagement you're going to have with them. It turns out that wildlife does this similar sort of thing as well. Because why? Because we are wildlife, and of course we respond in the same way that most wildlife does. So you can use those as principles for how you go about bringing biodiversity and spikes of ecological density in places. And of course, John's work just sort of, he doesn't bang on about it the same way we do, because he just doesn't need to. His work speaks for itself. And he's no nonsense approach to using recycled substrates and stuff that folks are chucking away from under when they're digging a road and all that kind of stuff. Is just absolutely brilliant, and it's totally in tune with what we believe and do here too. Yeah.
But then, but further comparisons between you guys, it's all, it's about nature, place, and people, isn't it? It's not about, it's not just, that's integral to both of your work.
It is, and I think because it has to be, Dan, doesn't it? Otherwise,
Well, but you say it has to be. Yes, it does have to be, in my personal opinion. But again, I can only talk from my sphere of knowledge that it's not always. It can just be all about aesthetic, and I don't want to say greenwashing, but just a pure aesthetic and a sort of a token effort.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that has been the way, and I think, you know, there's no doubt about it that has been the established way of doing things, and sort of is predominantly still the way of doing things. You know, why we live in a world where, you know, plastic grass exists, and you know, I mean, it's just astonishing that stuff is legal. I just don't get it, you know. But we live in a world where that is a thing. You go to the shops and buy it on a roll and go and cover your garden up with it. It's insane. But you know, so we're the antidote collectively. You are the antidote to this world, and so there's an educational side of what we do. You know, your podcast being part of that. You know, it's crucially important that we get these messages out so that people can understand this stuff that they can do, and it's not complicated.
Because it's interesting, the podcast, the last podcast I recorded, it's a biodiversity podcast, especially the last one I recorded with a guy called Richard Scott, and it was a biodiversity podcast, and we didn't talk about biodiversity, but we talked about the power of biodiversity to I hate the phrase, but it's the first one that springs to mind, unlock these communities, you know, that allowing people to use getting involved with, you know, the communities they're involved with, because unfortunately some sectors of society don't feel that they can be involved with, you know, biodiversity or have a sort of connection to nature. So it's a terrible state of affairs when you think of it like that. So our approach to that is to say, well, the things that we make and the consultancy work that we do and all of that these are aspects of what we actually do, and we decided a few years ago to sort of write, I don't know what you call it, really, like a memorandum to ourselves, just to say, sort of, you know, just in case we ever lost sight of what it is and what we're doing and why we're doing it, more to the point. And we called it Shaping Better Places, and it had 9 points to it, and it has 9 points to it. But what we discovered was that we were increasingly using Shaping Better Places as the message whenever a client comes to us for whatever aspect of the business that they want from us. We would, the Shaping Better Places story would unfold, and so we realized that it really did need to be more than just a message to ourselves, but a delivery framework, and that is now what it is. Shaping Better Places is what we do. Yes. And the objects that we make, and as I say, the consultancy and all the other bits and bobs that we do, the master planning and etc., are just aspects of Shaping Better Places manifesting itself. So it's quite a hard sell, because most places aren't ready for it yet. Well, perhaps they don't know. They know they need something, but they don't know that they need that. How can I put this? You've got to sell something to them that they don't know they need.
Exactly. Yeah. It's difficult because, without wanting to go down the rabbit hole, which is very, very easy to do, in terms of, the bigger issue of society and the system in which we find ourselves working. We are where we are. We do live in this free market capitalist system, which is inherently unsustainable. Yes. It just is. And so, sustainability as a concept only exists because of unsustainability, because our system is predicated on unsustainability. In the natural world, sustainability doesn't exist because it is all sustainable. You don't even need to talk about it. It's just, that's what it is. If you create yourselves an unsustainable world and you want to talk about trying to do things right, you have to have an idea and call it sustainability. And so you're on the back foot right from the start. And we work with corporates and policymakers and NGOs, etc. It's very difficult to find the starting point with them. We've helped organisations to write their sustainability plans, etc. But it's very difficult because, the bottom line is the number in the bottom left-hand corner of their spreadsheet. That's what they really are interested in. Not interested in, that until a business plan, it says, better environment, better world, better community in the bottom left-hand corner, and doesn't any longer have a figure in there, number, which is pounds. It's going to be very difficult to shift over, and we're going to see tick box exercises and target driven ESG stuff, and which potentially has every day. You mentioned the word greenwash. It's our nemesis, and we're always terrified that the objects that we make could be used for greenwash, because they absolutely could.